Hi everyone, this is Kieran Rose, the Autistic Advocate. You are watching me live on my page, and there's a little bit of delay with the video, which is normal, and there it goes. Right, I was just checking it was working because we had a little bit of a technical hitch just before. I am here with Kate Ross, who is an amazing writer who does amazing videos we've just discovered recently, and she is... Basically, she writes at Cherry Blossom Tree, My Autistic Journey. Is that right, Kate?
My autism experience.
My autism experience. Sorry. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, firstly, Kieran, thank you so much for having me on tonight. I am so excited to be here and to chat with you. So yeah, my name is Kate. I was only professionally identified as autistic just a little over 2 years ago. I moved to the UK just a little over 10 years ago as a qualified social worker, and I have about 5 years experience of working as a social worker within local authorities. And then I had nearly another 5 years of experience as a local authority special educational needs casework officer. That is a bit of a mouthful.
That is a mouthful, isn't it?
Yes, and it was working in SEN, which is much shorter to say, that I started learning a lot more about autism and subsequently discovered about my autism, and here we are today.
So you've had quite a journey, like coming over from America as well. That's a huge transition for you, isn't it? So
Yeah.
what brought you here?
Well, I mean, that in and of itself could take, an hour and a half. But the short version is basically when I started grad school in 2006, this agency, the social care agency, came and did a presentation at my university and said that the UK is desperate for social workers, and it'd be a really great opportunity post-grad to come and live and work in the UK for a while. So when I got this email through, I mentioned this to my dad, who is British. He's from Northern Ireland originally. And he got really excited and was like, "Oh, this would be a fantastic opportunity for you." And I thought he was trying to get me out of the country. But he said, you have dual citizenship from birth. It would be crazy for you to not just give it a go. So I kind of had, my pre-diagnosis head was like, okay, this is the path that I'm on. This is what I'm going to do. And I graduated in May 2008. This was just before the global economic crash. And it was back in the ever so quaint days of George W. Bush being in office. And this was, it feels like an eternity ago, doesn't it?
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. But the economy was on the downturn, and there just weren't really any social work jobs in Western New York that would have paid enough for me to survive, basically. I aspired to more than, just living in a, studio apartment eating ramen noodles for the rest of my life. And so, yeah, I took the punt and moved to the UK a month and a half after graduating. And came with a one-way ticket to Birmingham International Airport. Half of my belongings in storage, the other half in transit over here. And all at the tender age of 23.
Wow. So, and coming into Birmingham as well, that's quite a welcome for you. I bet that was had you been over here before? Was this the first time you come over?
No, I had been and visited family the summer beforehand. So I did have a bit of a sense of what I was coming into. And crazy enough, I now live in Gloucestershire. And so when we came and visited in 2007, we left about 10 days before the floods happened. And that was incredible timing. But when we arrived in England, it was about 2 days after the smoking ban started in pubs. And my uncle ran a pub at the time, and all of his patrons were like, "Oh, this is nonsense, having to go outside." And but we had those laws at least in New York since I was little, so I was like, You're only just stopping smoking inside establishments now?
Yeah.
Okay.
It added to
But
the ambience. That was what it was. The smoky
yeah,
haze. It was. It didn't matter that you couldn't breathe or speak. It was. It was definitely the smoky haze that made it more romantic, I think.
yeah, the smoky haze, the stale
Uh-huh.
lager, and pork scratchings on the floor, right? Like
And
that's,
sticky, yeah, and sticky floors as well. That's the other thing.
yes,
Definitely
absolutely.
sticky floors.
So
Anyway, we
yeah,
have digressed massively already, and we've only
yeah,
been
sorry.
talking for 5 minutes. It's amazing. Right. So the reason that I wanted to talk to you, sorry, I'm losing my voice now. It's typical.
Oh dear.
Is because Take the Mask Off, which has been running now for, we're in the fifth week, I think, fourth or fifth week. I can't remember now. It feels like it's been going on for years. It's been an amazing couple of weeks, but this
Yes,
week is Burnout, and Burnout is a hugely significant thing in my life. It's something that I've written about extensively, and I know from very brief conversations with you that it's something that's impacted on you a great deal as well. And
absolutely.
so that was one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you this week. But also, I've kind of tied these 2 weeks together in terms of burnout and mental health because the two are so intrinsically linked. Um,
Absolutely.
and I wanted to get your perspective on not only, you know, girls on the spectrum and underdiagnosis of girls, which is obviously a huge thing at the moment, but also the impact of undiagnosis on mental health in women as well. So I think
Absolutely.
so all of this kind of marries around each other. I know we've talked a little bit about some other things that we'd both like to touch upon, but
Yeah.
that's kind of so I really what I want is I'm going to shut up for once in my life because people are sick of hearing me talk all the time, and
Oh, stop.
I would like to hear your story. So please, just the floor is yours. So take it away, whatever you want to say.
Okay. Well, I first of all, I absolutely love the campaign that you and Hannah started, and I am so excited to, be in any way involved in it. So, thank you both for the extremely hard work that you've put into that. So about my story, and this is where I start monologuing. um, to be honest, I don't know if I'm ever not masking, to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
I was raised at a time when parents disciplined or punished perceived bad behavior. And as an impressionable child, I had to learn how to adapt my behavior so I didn't get told off or punished. And even now, I don't always cope well with, being fed back to, which is such a strange phrase, but, being given feedback,
Yeah.
because it can feel like an attack on like my goodness as a person.
Yeah.
And, even if that's not even remotely it at all, it can be constructive criticism and I will still feel like the biggest failure in the world. And it's awful. Um, and trying to maintain this facade is exhausting beyond belief. And even using the analogy of a swan feels inadequate, the gliding smoothly on the surface, but madly kicking under the water. I feel more like a cat in water. Get me out of here. Just like, ah! It's just awful. So, my own experience of burnout happened last year. And to be honest, I feel like I'm still recovering from it. Um, as anyone living in the UK will know, that local authorities have been having their budgets squeezed tighter and tighter over the last decade.
Mhm.
And not only does that impact upon the children and families that need those resources, but it also massively impacts upon the staff who are frontline on the ground doing that direct work. And it's part of the reason why I ended up burning out as a social worker because, being thinking about it now, as a 33-year-old woman, I do not know how it was even responsible for me as a 23-year-old newly qualified social worker to have been working in a frontline social work team because I did not have the life experience needed to really be able to engage with these families.
Yeah.
And even though I feel like I have far more of that life experience now, I feel like I'm far too sensitive to go back into that realm. So, I have my degrees hung on the wall, and I think those are two very expensive pieces of paper right there. So if anything, that's why I'm trying to utilize the skills that I, have from my education in this new forum. It's repackaging it slightly. So yeah, I ended up burning out of social work because my caseload was just unmanageable. And despite the fact that I was asking in supervision regularly to, look at reevaluating my cases and, seeing where some of the load could be lightened, it was just impossible because there was nowhere else for these cases to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up losing a job where I've never talked about this publicly. So
Okay.
I had taken what I thought was a step up in my career to work for a fostering agency. And, this is where the Aspie literalism comes into play. In the interview, they had mentioned offhand one sentence, "How do you feel about recruiting foster carers?" And I said, "Because you're in an interview situation, you want to get the job." I said, "Yeah, I'm open to learning about that." When I started the job, it turned out that even though my title was supervising social worker, my job was to recruit foster carers. And as an undiagnosed autistic, that was an impossible task. Because rather than, doing Form F assessments for prospective foster carers or going and supporting those who had children in placement, I was sitting behind a table in Sainsbury's foyer hoping that people would come and talk to me to inquire about foster care.
Yeah.
And I'm not being funny. I don't know about you, but when I go do my grocery shopping, I'm not thinking about fostering children.
No, absolutely not.
And the worst thing that they said to me when I was, it was still the early days of my employment, and I was, obviously still trying to impress. I was trying to ask for help, and they would just kind of say to me, "Well, use your initiative." What? What? How is that helpful? Use your initiative. And again, to the autistic brain, the unknowing autistic brain, I had no idea where to start.
Yeah.
Zero, none whatsoever. And, looking back on it, this was about 6 years ago, over 6 years ago. What you need for, an agency that's going to be recruiting foster carers, they need someone with a marketing background.
Yeah.
Because it's wasted on a social worker.
Of course.
You need the social worker, perhaps there to answer the more in-depth questions, but the recruitment side of it, you need someone with business acumen. You need someone with that kind of experience. And I ended up, losing that job a week and a half after coming back from my honeymoon, which was a great way to start off married life. And when I had a brief spell where I was, either unemployed or in short-term teaching assistant jobs. And then I worked as an outreach worker for a little while. And then I ended up working for another fostering agency, being fully transparent about the previous experience that I had with the other one. And I was like, please don't make me do recruitment. And then about 5.5 months in, we needed to do recruitment again because we moved office and needed to pay for that new office. And it was at that point that I was like, I can't do this anymore. And that was when I left social work, and that was March 2013. And I was in and out of the field of social work in less time than it took me to get both of my degrees.
Ouch.
Which absolutely breaks my heart. But then I kind of ended up falling face first into SEN, which, because, as you very kindly said, I'm quite good at writing.
Mhm.
With SEN, I was writing statements of special educational need. And then when
Right.
the legislation changed, education, health, and care plans. So it was still, I reconciled it in myself that I was still doing work for children, just not directly with children.
Yeah.
And even though I came from a social care background and not an education background, there were a lot of parallels. So I
Hmm.
was able to kind of pick it up quite quickly. And and it was particularly working in South Gloucestershire that I really got the opportunity to learn a lot more about autism, because that area of the country, you know, where it's Bristol adjacent, and
Sure.
you've got the Ministry of Defense base there, you've got Airbus, you've got Rolls-Royce, you've got a lot of very technical industry down
Yeah.
there. And what we were seeing, excuse me, were a lot of parents getting diagnosed at the same time as their children.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the kids on my caseload, you know, were, you know, somewhere on the autism spectrum. And I would just love reading through the specialist reports and, you know, picking up, you know, all the different nuances, because with it being a spectrum condition, no two children present the same way.
Yeah.
And it was very much, you know, an interesting learning opportunity for me whilst being a rewarding career. And there was one report in particular that I remember reading. It was for about an 8-year-old girl. And it said that she did not enjoy engaging in messy play because she didn't like her hands getting dirty. And I thought to myself, what's so weird about that? Like, I don't like it. You know, I hated messy play when I was a kid. You know, I come from Buffalo. You know, the food of Buffalonians are chicken wings.
Yeah.
And as much as I love chicken wings, I hate getting the sauce on my fingers. So
Hmm.
in between each chicken wing, I end up having, you know, a pile of bones on one side and a pile of napkins on the other. Because in between each one, I'm like, I don't like my hands being all sticky. Oh, just even talking about it, I can feel it on my hands. And my hands are clean, by the way. So yeah, when I read that, I was like, you know, what's so strange about that? And, you know, the being really sensitive to bright lights and loud noises, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, what's so bizarre about that type of thing?
Hmm.
Because that's me as well. But all the while, I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh my God, this could be me. That revelation came in June 2015
Right.
when I was attending the Autism Show, which is put on by the National Autistic Society. They do one in London, Manchester, and Birmingham. And Birmingham was the most local one to me, at about an hour away. And it was hearing a few different women speak about their experience of diagnosis in adulthood
Hmm.
that really resonated with me. Now, I had put together my own little timetable because totes normal. Uh, because there were 3 different stages, and I didn't want to, you know, end up having conflicts as to, you know, who
Uh-huh.
was going to be speaking in that, because
No, I did the same thing in Manchester earlier this year. So
that's amazing. And now the funny thing is, because I was attending with my colleague, a colleague from my team, I couldn't understand why he wasn't doing the same thing for himself, so I did one for him. And he didn't seem to totally appreciate it, but never mind. And so yeah, there was one woman in particular who went by the name Catherine Green at the time. And I'm sorry, Kate, if you watch this, I never know how to pronounce your surname. She goes by her professional name now as Catherine Uher. She runs
Right.
the Sensitivity Spectrum website, which I can send
Mm.
you the link for. She's a very insightful writer. She's published. She's so lovely, and another American expat. So when she was telling her story about school, it was, you know, we had a lot of similar experiences growing up. So it did really resonate with me. And I found her at the end of the first day and just broke down in tears. And I'm like, oh my God, like what you said and what I've experienced. I'm like, I didn't even know what to think. And I think, um, I think I might have put this in my musings about masking video about the Lego structure of your sense of identity. And, when you make it
Yeah.
to 30, you have a pretty, well-formed Lego structure of personality. And mine was just completely knocked on the floor and scattered
Hmm.
after that. And over the year that I was, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. In the month or so that I was looking into it and researching it for myself and, decided to pursue a professional diagnosis, piecing that all back together, it put everything, all my past failures, all my past faux pas, everything that had ever gone wrong in one way, shape, or form into a context.
Hmm.
And I thought that, perhaps getting the I'm looking for, not like, the magical cure all for everything,
Sure.
but certainly, the go-to to say, oh, okay, when I'm having this difficulty, this is because I'm autistic and this is why, it's the explanation, not the
Yeah.
excuse.
Hmm.
And
Everything kind of falls into place at that point, doesn't it?
absolutely, absolutely. And if anything, I almost feel like post-diagnosis, now that I'm, about 2 years in, even though I am much more aware of things and do my best to be kinder to myself and not push myself so hard, I still can't help that drive for perfectionism that's innate in me. And if anything, it's almost kind of like that phrase, you can't unring a bell.
Yeah.
So once you know about your neurological differences and you recognize why you can't handle certain things, whilst one line of logic would make you think that you would know how to manage those things better. If anything, I have found the exact opposite.
Mm.
I have found that because I know that I find certain things difficult, if I start to anticipate them, it spikes my anxiety and just
Yeah.
makes me like fall to
Uh-huh.
pieces. And if anything, like I said, I'm 33, but I almost feel like in my head, I've almost regressed back to being a teenager again. I almost feel like I'm not responsible enough to be an adult. you know, I feel like I'm still trying to get to grips with everything.
Yeah.
And,
Do you think
it's,
that's part? Do you think that's part of? I mean, obviously, I'm not neurotypical. I'm not non-autistic. I don't know what it's like to grow up non-autistic.
yeah,
But do you think for non-autistic people that what you're describing there that happens to them much earlier? That they, that things fall into place naturally for them as they're growing up. Whereas obviously for us, we're what is natural for us, we're suppressing it, we're pushing it to one side kind of thing, and we're hanging on the coattails of somebody else kind of thing, trying to copy what they're doing and,
yes.
and mimicking what's going around us. So what you said there's really pertinent. I think that kind of you've reached the age of 33 and you feel like you're a child still.
Yeah.
But is that, do you think, because your personality, your Lego foundation of personality kind of got knocked over, that everything's kind of reset for you? Do you think that maybe that's a part of that?
It very well could be. It very, very well could be. And you know how when we were in school and the other kids just seemed to naturally get on with each other,
Yeah.
and it seemed like they almost had been handed the guidebook on friendships and just general peopling
Hmm.
that that we never, I'm sorry, I just make up words. Um,
No, that's fine. I know exactly what you
um,
mean.
that we're just kind of left feeling really perplexed. And it's like, well, how come they seem to get it and I don't? I'm
Yeah.
trying to follow the same patterns, because we look for patterns, we look for,
Hmm.
the back and forth and what the exchanges are like. So that is how we end up flying under the radar for so long.
Yeah.
And certainly, people of our generation, because autism wasn't really understood in the broad dynamic range that it is today. You know, it was, you know, and I apologize in advance, I don't like functioning labels, but autism was perceived more certainly, you know, in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, as those with severe learning difficulties and significant care needs.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the most polite way to put it without using functioning terms. And, you know, because when I was growing up, you know, not to toot my own horn here, but I was reasonably intelligent. I behaved well and got decent grades.
Yeah.
I just coasted, you know, and no one would have ever thought that I was really struggling on the inside. And even my dad, you know, when I kind of came out to him and said, I think I might be autistic, you know, he almost felt bad and thought, you know, how did I miss this? How did I not see the signs growing up? And I said, you know, you wouldn't have known because I was intelligent, because I was well behaved, and because I did well in school. You would have no reason to think anything was wrong.
Yeah.
But because I had learned how to mask and camouflage at a very early age, and that's why, how I said at the beginning, I don't know if I'm ever not masking, because this is all I've known how to act. And if anything, the only time anyone has ever seen me without this, you know, proverbial mask on is in the middle of a meltdown. And I don't like people seeing me in the middle of a meltdown. It's horrible, you know. I don't like being in it myself.
Yeah.
And because that's when I feel almost like at my most primal, I suppose, because the emotion is just trying to break out from the inside. And it's so hard to just contain it back in, because even though that release after a while, after you exhaust yourself completely, may feel a bit good, you are still putting the genie back in the bottle.
Sure.
You know, it's never fully gone.
No.
So, yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? It's masking is one of the things that damages us the most, but it's kind of it protects us as well, doesn't it? And that's the reason that we do it. It's a very I don't know if there's a conscious decision at some point when we're a kid, we need to switch this thing on, and it's kind of wherever it's something that just grows and grows and grows, and it kind of snowballs and gets out of hand as well, doesn't it? To a degree, it's kind of, I mean, I remember looking back I was diagnosed at 23, so that's 16 years ago now. It's a long time, and I can say it does get the unmasking does get easier. It does get better. You never stop. you never stop. But the more introspective you become, and that's one thing that late diagnosed people have in their favor at the moment, which sounds bizarre to say that a late diagnosis now is in their favor. Because there's so much information out there and there are so many people to talk to. And there was a point when I got diagnosed, you know, there was barely even the internet then. So there was nothing. And what you said there about the idea of what autism was back in the 80s and 90s, it was Rain Man, wasn't it, really? Or it was a child that rocks and smacks their head against the cot bars, and that they were the two ideas of autism, and they still perpetuate now. But
and those are very rigid stereotypes. Yeah,
absolutely. You were either super intelligent and had absolutely zero communication ability whatsoever, or you were literally rocking in a corner and had no communication ability whatsoever. So, and I think that's what throws a lot of parents now, especially those who do have the children who do have high level of needs. That disparity between us and their children, I think that's why they struggle with that, because I think that cultural view of it is still perpetuating now, isn't it? It's still at the back of everybody's head. The moment you say autism, someone thinks Rain Man. If you're of a certain age and above, that's the automatic thing that comes into your head. But I've completely lost track of what I was going to say there. But masking for me has become obviously, well, the reason I set up this campaign with Hannah was, you know, one of the most important things about being autistic and about being late diagnosed. And it is the main reason that we are missed, and it is the main reason that we
Yeah.
have been missed. But one of the things that I wanted to get across with this campaign is that, you know, masking isn't just about non-diagnosed adults and kids. It's about people that are diagnosed as well. And, you know, I wrote a few months ago when I did the big article that I did about burnout, the one that seems to have gone, that's like triggered all of this really. I wrote in there about how we have we've had generations of us who have gone undiagnosed, we've been late diagnosed, but now we've got generations of kids that are being diagnosed, but are still going through exactly the same experiences that we went through as undiagnosed people. You know, there might be a little bit more awareness. They've got the label, but it doesn't mean anything's changed for them necessarily. And it's kind of, so how does that kind of, from your social worker background, the training that I presume that you got around autism and around other aspects of neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So how does that correlate with what you know now? Was it, you know, is there like a bit of a conflict between the two? Are they far removed from each other, or were there similarities? Did you get useful information thinking now, looking back?
Well, to state up front, my social work degree, I did one module on psychopathology, where the only textbook was the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual Text Revision 4, so the DSM TR4. And we're now up to version 5 of the DSM, which is the diagnostic schedule that is used by the American Psychological Association, and basically has codes for healthcare practitioners to put in insurance claim forms. Fun fact.
Just for anyone, the ICD-10 now, isn't it? It's what's used in the UK by diagnosticians and across Europe as well.
Yes. If anything, it would be nice if there was just the one thing rather than two, but that's by the by. But thinking back, doing that module, I can't even remember. I think we, like, one component, like one chapter of the module was about autism, Asperger's syndrome, Rett syndrome, PDD, NOS, so pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, hence why the acronym. And I remember, you know, reading through the diagnostic criteria. Certainly at that time, I did not identify with any of it. No. And it would have never even occurred to me that that explained me, because the terminology in the DSM is very clinical. It is very, very specific in terms of what the presentation is supposed to be. And it's very stereotyped, if you will, which, yes, there are features in autism where, you know, we do have very stereotyped behaviors, but that is not exclusively it. And, you know, so my, you know, my formal education about autism was very, very limited. Excuse me. And I ended up learning more about it on the job in SEN, really, by reading educational psychologist reports, specialist teacher reports. I know in different local authorities they have different names, but basically there would be specialist teachers, so people who used to be teachers in a classroom who specialize specifically in communication disorders and autism. Sure. And they would go into schools and provide information and advice as to how to support a child with a particular need. And then they would contribute a report to either the statement or the EHCP. And so it was really reading those documents that I was really getting a proper overview into the broad spectrum of the spectrum. And if anything, what I want to reassure any parents who are watching this, who either your child is diagnosed as autistic or you suspect they might be, and if you're going through the application process for an education, health, and care plan through your local authority, and again, don't know how worldwide reaching this is, but this is specifically for the UK. It's very difficult to get a plan agreed, or at least the assessment agreed, for children who mask in school and do well and behave, and they show no difficulty in the classroom setting. But then as soon as they come home, they blow up.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, in my last job, when I was reading through assessments, and I could see clear as day from the parents' reports that these children were autistic and they were awaiting an assessment, the school reports would all say, no problem whatsoever. They're a star pupil. They do well academically, you know, the whole laundry list to rule it out. But I would be so conflicted because I would be like, but this kid needs help. You know, I would be like internally screaming it, like, this kid needs help. But because of the structure of these plans, education, health, and care plans, if there's no educational need, because education drives it,
that's it.
That's it. You know, if it's just a social care need, then you get referred to social care, or if it's just a health need, you get referred to health. But if education is not one of those components, it just won't go ahead.
No.
And
that's a lot of responsibility to put on education as well, though, isn't it? Because I mean, I did a speech recently about responsibility of professionals who work in and around autism. And, you know, I don't ever seek to blame anyone for not addressing a child's needs or missing a child's needs or whatever. But I do blame them for not taking responsibility for their own education. And and there's a lot that feeds into that. Obviously, there's time and there's money, and, you know, at the end of the day, and a lot of the focus here is on the education system and how schools are set up. And this, particularly in the UK, but I know other Western countries as well. Obviously, school systems are very, very similar, even from the way the classrooms are set up and things like that, and the things that are taught and the way that they're taught and the rigidity of the education system as well. And it's kind of, there is a lot of responsibility put on schools, but I think there's a responsibility for schools to say, look, we're not experts in this either. And I think that's something that is quite often missing, that doesn't come across from teachers, doesn't come across.
Absolutely.
They make themselves the professionals in the room, and they hide behind that professionality and won't admit when they don't know what they're talking about to some degree. But children's lives are being affected, families are being affected by the decisions that teachers and education authorities are making when they're not in full control of the information. They don't have all the facts or the knowledge that they need to be able to make proper decisions. And it's kind of, it's interesting that you say that from your perspective, from your side, that you saw that as well, from your professional social work side, you saw that coming out of education as well, that they're the ones ultimately who are making the decisions and driving the decisions. And it's scary that this is happening, isn't it? And I know there's a big thing there's a lot of this happening recently of parents, particularly autistic parents, but not just autistic parents, being accused of FII, what used to be Munchausen's by proxy. So there's a significant number of parents, not obviously we're not talking millions, but we're talking significant numbers of parents that are actually being accused. It's significant enough that it warrants, you know, it's becoming more and more apparent around the country that social services are maybe using that as a get out, or as an easy option. It's easier to accuse a parent of fabricating their child's condition because they don't see it, or because education teams don't see it, than it is to actually investigate properly because they don't have the time or the resources. Again, it's kind of, everything is stacked up against the child here still, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that is what absolutely broke my heart, and part of the reason, again, why I ended up burning out of these local authority positions that I was in. Because, you know, I loved working in SEN. I absolutely loved it. And, you know, the team of people that I worked with were fantastic. And, you know, the professionals in the schools I built up really good relationships with. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's it comes down to the child and the fact that, the government is, I'm going to say something really bold and controversial here. The government is failing this nation's children because they have put a straitjacket on local authority funding and, are forcing local authorities to commission out a lot of their services to private companies that don't know their ass from their elbow and are wondering why all of this money is being wasted and no tangible changes are being seen. And, people may call me, a lefty liberal, bleeding heart, tree hugging hippie, social justice warrior, snowflake. I really don't care. At the end of the day, I care about, uh, I'll quote Whitney Houston here. I believe the children are our future. And, what kind of world are we setting up for these kids if we can see the difficulty and yet still not do anything to change it? That is the biggest crime because, our generation, those of us who are adults and are only being diagnosed as autistic in adulthood, there were failings, but we can't exactly blame our parents and our teachers for missing out on it because society was none the wiser. But we are wiser now. We have the internet. We have infinite resources at our hands. And the fact that, other autistics like you and I and, the plethora of others that you and I have networked with literally around the world are there, and we are telling our stories and we are shouting it from the rooftops, and nothing is still changing. That's the problem. And that's why campaigns like this are so important, to raise that awareness, to get people angry, because angry people demand change. And I don't like being angry, but I like seeing positive change.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, to be honest. It terrifies me. It really does. And it terrifies me that people look to the UK as one of the leading lights in autism research.
Absolutely.
And I wake up every morning and, I switch on my computer, I look at what's going on in the world. There are some mornings I think we've made so much progress and so much positive, good stuff is happening. And then literally the next day I could turn on my computer and think, why are we even bothering? It's kind of, it really feels like it makes me feel bipolar to that degree. It's kind of, there's so much good, the UK particularly, there is so much good stuff happening. There is so much positive stuff happening. I've only got to think back to Autism Awareness Week, where really all of this started, because it was such a positive week here in the UK, and the autistic voice was heard all over the place. And, we were on the television, the radio, and there was amazing blogs and discussions and all sorts of brilliant stuff went on. And then on the same side of it, knowing from what we do, the work that we do, we know the stuff that goes on behind the background. It's kind of, we've got one track that's like there's a train chuntering forward full of positivity, and then there's another track with a train going in the complete opposite direction. And it's kind of, how do you correlate those two things? It's really, and as people who are public, who do have a public, like as we do, we have a platform. It's kind of, this feeds into my near permanent state of feeling in burnout to a degree, because I can't correlate those two things, because I'm furiously trying to inspire people up and down the country and all over the world, and with what I write, and I know you are too. And then on the other hand, you just look at it and think, oh my God, it's awful. It really is. And we're a progressive country. That's the worst part of this.
Absolutely. If I go through a day without having at least one nihilistic existential crisis, I wonder what I've done with my day, because it ends up, like, seriously, there are some days, especially because, being an American expat and having, friends and family who still live in the States, I keep up with American politics. And oh my God, there are some days where I'm just like, what's the point? What is the point? Why am I even getting out of bed? Like, bed is safe. Bed is comfortable. I should just stay in bed. because clearly nothing I can say or do is going to change a damn thing. And, you know, I try to put a positive spin on things. And if anything, particularly with the Take the Mask Off campaign, I have been sharing a lot more about not necessarily the darker side of my life, but, you know, the more real, ugly, you know, pain and struggle. And, you know, if anything, I've always kept it, you know, very private because I never want anyone to think that I'm doing it for attention seeking purposes.
Yeah, sure.
Or for them to think, oh, it's really not that bad, you're just being dramatic, or you know, anything like that, because, you know, I do have a very self-deprecating sense of humor, as you've seen, and, you know, it is very easy for me to put a bit of a sarcastic spin on it and ha 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 and just let it go. But, you know, when I'm by myself, or, you know, it's just me and the cat, like, you know, there are some days that I don't even recognize myself. I'll catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and I'm like, that's not me, you know. And again, that comes down to the whole masking thing, because you end up putting on this perpetual performance. And I don't know if you ever did drama or anything when you were in school. I did plays and musicals when I was in middle and high school. And you do, you know, 3 or 4 performances and you're tired by the end of it, and, you know, everyone has a great time. But, you know, trying to get people to understand that we are living on the stage 24/7.
Yeah.
And
literally with the script exhausting as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Literally with the script. It is exhausting, isn't it? And that's you've kind of we went on another divergent tangent there, but you brought us nicely back around to the thrust of the conversation. It's I'm just glancing at some of the comments there, and people actually kind of agreeing and relating to what you're kind of saying and stuff. We have a couple of questions about social worker kind of stuff. Is that all right? Just throw one at you.
Okay. I mean, the fact that I have put the disclaimer out there that I have not practiced as a social worker since 2013. So I will do my best. I will do my best.
If I can find it now. It was a little while ago. This is where I make a fool of myself now because I can't find it.
While you look for the comment, just, you know, for the sake of transparency, some people may have seen this on my Instagram. If you follow me on Instagram, this is my squishy strawberry, which I have been sitting and fiddling with while we've been talking. You know, taking the mask off, I'm stimming.
That's the thing, isn't it? And that's kind of because we're shoulders up. No one sees what we're doing.
No one, you know, and yeah, to a degree, I can be like, well, you know, like.
And also, that's another thing as well, because we are public, because we kind of, you know, I kind of not live my life on the internet, but, you know, publicly on the internet, but I'm publicly available to a lot of people. What they don't realize is that, you know, we'll finish this conversation, I'll turn this off, and then I will just literally collapse in a heap on the floor because we've talked for so long, you know. And it's kind of, that's the bit that's missed by a lot of parents who listen to us and, you know, who don't respond to us necessarily positively. They miss this kind of bit, you know, and how that plays into, you know, we go to work all day, or even not go to work all day because we can't work anymore. But every social interaction for us is hugely demanding and hugely difficult. And it's kind of, you know, a non-autistic person can pop to the shops, buy something, have 3 chats with 3 different people, and then come back again and not think twice about it. Yeah, for us, that's the equivalent of running 3 marathons back to back. And it is though, isn't it? And it's kind of, that's something I want to talk to you in a bit, is about what you felt when you were in burnout, how physically and not emotionally, but how physically you felt. But just a question, I've just got back to it. Tina Leggett has asked, if a child is diagnosed autistic, do they have a social worker on a disability team?
Not necessarily. Okay. So the only way that your family would become known to the local authority is if a referral is made. Now, that can either come from yourself as the parent, seeking additional support from social care, or if there's, a potential child protection concern, then that referral may come from a school professional or from a neighbor. It may come from an anonymous source. It's very hard to say. But if we leave the child protection side out of it, because that is very sensitive, if you feel that your child could benefit from social care input, you can make that referral, and an assessment would need to be done. I think it's within 21 days, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, my social work background was not in children with disabilities. It was children and families, and looked after children primarily. But surely if you make a referral for yourself, the timescales of everything will be explained to you. I don't want to say anything and then have it be too far to anything. And so based on that needs assessment that would be completed, then that social worker would end up determining if your child's presentation, if their level of need meets a certain threshold for support to be in place and a worker to be allocated.
Okay.
And again, since I've not practiced social work for 5 years, but I've only, in the last 8 months come out of the local authority as a whole, I can imagine that those thresholds, the tolerance thresholds have gone up.
Yeah.
In that, a certain level of need may just be below that threshold, and a family would potentially need to be in crisis mode in order for a social worker to be allocated.
Okay.
So I hope that answers your question. You said it was Tina, right?
Yeah, Tina Leggett.
Yeah. Tina, I do hope that answers your question, Tina. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for answering. No, just put you on the spot there completely.
All right.
Right. So back to burnout. So when you were going through this period of burnout, and you were still undiagnosed at this point as well, am I right in thinking that?
No, I was diagnosed.
Right.
But I was only a few months in.
Okay.
So bearing in mind that the year that I had to wait for my assessment was brutal, because as with each passing day, I was figuring out more and more. And remember that scattered Lego structure.
Yeah.
Over the course of that year, I was slowly picking the pieces back up and reassembling it, in this new shape of an identity for myself.
Sure.
And so if I jump forward to when I actually had my first 2 assessment appointments, they weren't going to diagnose me.
Right.
Because I was too creative. And that was with I was given you and I should do another chat about how ridiculous the ADOS assessment is. Okay? I won't go into all of that now because we'll be chatting until midnight.
The swearing might start again as well.
Let's get it in the calendar why the ADOS is ridiculous for diagnosing adults. But yeah, apparently I was too creative when given a children's book without any words in it, and I was able to tell a story. But again, what is innate and what is learned? I love reading. I have loved reading since I was a child.
Yeah.
And I performed, as I mentioned before, in plays and musicals when I was in school. So
hold on a minute, Kate. Sorry, my little girl's just walked in to say goodnight, I think.
Okay.
Are you going to go and look? You wave to everyone.
Hi. Aw, bless her.
Do I get a kiss? No, you just get a tweak on the nose. Thank you. Go on then. Go on then. I'll see you in the morning. Love you. Night-night. Night-night. Well, I'm very sorry that you've counted how many times you say goodnight to me.
Oh, bless her.
Yes, that's an undiagnosed daughter.
Oh, bless her. Oh, and we need to come to masking on children, or masking for children as well. But yeah, so they weren't going to diagnose me because I was too creative, and I engaged apparently too well with the clinical psychologist and the speech therapist. Now, again, I was being polite. I was, I was engaging how I thought I was supposed to be engaging, And again, it's very hard to, when you've been wearing a mask for so long, it is so hard to take it off your face, especially when you're in the situation where you're trying to get that validation you need. So initially, when they said they weren't going to diagnose me, I was numb. And the Lego structure that I had rebuilt for myself, the metaphorical Lego structure I'd rebuilt, was just knocked off the table again. And I was numb and almost catatonic for about 3 days afterwards, until I wrote them a 4.5-page letter why I thought they were full of nonsense. And then I was given another appointment 2 months later, 2 whole months later, with the psychiatrist that was part of the team. And I attended that appointment with my dad and my husband. And after 4.5 grueling hours of interview, she recognized that I have a lot of rejection issues. And you can read about those on my blog. And sorry, shameless plug there, trying to lighten the mood a bit. And but she said, putting all of those issues around rejection aside, it did not fully explain everything else. And that was where she recognized that diagnosing me as autistic was the professional validation that I needed to be able to pick those pieces all up again and move my life forward. Yeah. So that was August 2016 that I was diagnosed.
Okay.
The breakdown happened in January 2017. Working in SEN and working with one particularly difficult parent who redirected his anger towards the local authority directly to me and made it personal, said that I was denying his autistic son speech and language therapy that he needed. Now, obviously, I did not disclose to this man that I was autistic myself because I didn't know if he would somehow be prejudiced about, me being an autistic caseworker. But he made the attack personal, and the angry letter that he wrote to the director of children's services, he also posted publicly on Facebook, which named me by name.
Ouch.
And bear in mind that I am very much a highly sensitive person. I am an empath. I feel things 1,000 times more than the average person.
Yeah.
And that just cut me to my core. And, he had sent the letter into our department on the Thursday. We found out that it was posted on Facebook on the Friday. Saturday and Sunday, I didn't leave the house. Monday, I worked from home because, again, I couldn't bear to drive into the office. And by the Tuesday morning, I could not stop crying. And I phoned my GP and got an appointment within like half an hour or something, which never happens. But I was that distressed on the phone to the receptionist. And when I saw my GP, that was the first time I ever saw her, even though I'm, again, don't know if it's innate or if it's learned because I studied psychology and social work, but that was the first time I perceived my GP as being sad herself. She's like, I've known you for years now, and I have never seen you this low. And, without hesitation, she signed me off work. I shut my work computer away and had that sick note renewed like every 3 to 4 weeks, because how do you put a time scale on recovering from that kind of thing? You can't.
No.
It's over a year later, and I still have days in my new job, which is completely out of the local authority realm, where I'm still very fragile. And I've yet to have a week I've been in this new job 6 months. I have yet to have a week where there's not been tears at least one day. And that is so embarrassing for me as, a seemingly, put together 33-year-old woman. It's embarrassing. And even saying, I'm autistic doesn't excuse it. Or not excuse it. It doesn't explain it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't explain it. Autistics don't just spontaneously burst into tears. Like, that's not a typical thing. And, a good friend of mine through Spectrum Women, we have such an amazing, group of writers with Spectrum Women.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them said to me, I almost wonder if you're dealing with some kind of PTSD from this whole thing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until she said that I was like, you might be right.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where my too logical brain comes into, causes interference for me, because, people will recommend counseling or therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. I have studied psychology. I know how these things work. And I almost feel like because I've read the manual, it ain't going to work for me. It's
Yeah.
Not like CBT is like the equivalent of hypnosis or anything, but I don't, for myself, cognitive behavioral therapy presumes disordered thinking. I don't feel like my thinking is disordered.
No.
I have reactions to environmental stimuli that trigger me,
Mm-hmm.
but I, in my head, do not see how any amount of, talking therapy or what have you is going to change that. Unfortunately, my experiences are my experiences. So unless we develop technology like an internal sunshine of the spotless mind, where you can just have memories erased,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I
They're
feel
still
like
going to be there.
they're still going to be there.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And no matter how you rearrange them or look at them in a different light, they're still going to be a negative experience, aren't they? And that's why I think a lot of autistic people struggle with CBT, because it's reframing stuff that's happened. But how do you reframe stuff that's happened when you think so logically? How can you reframe an experience? You can't all of a sudden think, I went through this horrendous thing. Oh, but there were positives to it. Let's look at it from that point of view, because there weren't any positives to it. And it's kind of,
exactly.
It is that reframing of that experience that I think we find so difficult. And I don't know if a non-autistic brain can somehow compartmentalize those things and look at it from different aspects and things, and completely put one thing, a negative part of it, to one side and reframe it like that. But I can't do that. I've been through talking therapies and CBT, and it's been a huge waste of time for me. So how then, what you're describing there could, from an external perspective, easily be classed as depression.
Absolutely.
So how do you make that distinction between the two then? Were you depressed while this was happening, do you feel, or do you feel this was entirely burnout, or do you feel that one has maybe turned into the other?
I think it has it's certainly a multi-layered thing. The burnout definitely came from me just being too exhausted to keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
Because, with that particular parent, I bent over backwards to do what I could for his kid. They moved into the local authority, had come from, a really crappy home experience in the previous authority they were with. He needed a school placement. I was doing my utmost. Every email that I communicated to this guy, I had checked by a manager to make sure that I was not miscommunicating anything, that I wasn't making promises that I couldn't keep. I did absolutely everything. And to have it all thrown back in my face like that, I was just like, what am I doing? Why am I trying so hard? Why do I care so much? just why? You know, it ended up just making me feel very defeatist.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you know, perhaps it did lead to a degree of depression, but the problem is with antidepressants, they treat a chemical imbalance. They don't magically perk you up because things are a bit crap.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, full disclosure, I have been on duloxetine, which is, you know, primarily for anti-anxiety, but I question how effective that is. And it can also act as an antidepressant. It's a SNRI versus an SSRI, so it's a selective. No, oh crap. Because it's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So I think I can't remember what the N is, and I'm talking to you on my phone, so it's not like I can
Google it. Somebody Google it and let us know.
Yeah, someone Google what an SNRI is. Sierra November. I know the reuptake inhibitor, and I know the selective. I just need to know what the N is. But yeah, so those are designed to manage chemical imbalances, and those of us who have experienced traumatic experiences,
mm-hmm.
you know, trauma rewires the brain.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you're chemically imbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, I feel like, you know, because I've been on this for however long, and because I'm still getting tearful at my new job, I'm concerned about coming off of it.
Sure.
Because, you know, what if I'm worse afterwards,
mm-hmm.
you know? And I almost feel like I would need a sabbatical from work to just be at home to detox off of it, because I would not be fit to be in public. You know, it's a very tricky thing.
It is.
So
It is
I think it's almost a kind of chicken and egg situation. Does depression and anxiety cause burnout, or does burnout cause depression and anxiety? I think they hold hands and skip down the path together.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I've framed it in the path in terms of burnout, in that, you know, I've kind of pulled burnout to pieces a little bit, so that, you know, I've described it as you have social daily burnout kind of thing, where you go through your daily living and, you know, you're exhausted by the end of the day. But whereas most non-autistic people would be tired at the end of the day, go to bed, and then wake up the next morning and feel refreshed, we don't. No. So it's like you so day 2 you start at a slight disadvantage, and then on day 3 you have a bigger disadvantage, and so on and so on and so on. And then what, from talking to lots of other autistic people and the research that I did on the article, it kind of, there was a pattern that emerged, that everybody went through this kind of daily social burnout, and yes, that built up over time. But then what triggered extreme burnout, what you're describing there was usually something traumatic happened. So something that if you hadn't had that daily social burnout, you maybe would have been able to deal with a lot better. But because you've got the weight of all this other stuff pulling you back, all this lethargy that goes with that and everything else that goes with that, the moment the traumatic experience happens, you then trip into this extreme form of burnout, which is often itself tied in with depression, often mistaken for depression. Yeah. But then that extreme burnout, in what I've understood from other people and from my own experience, that extreme burnout does eventually end up in some form of depression, usually ends up in some form of depression. But there is a distinct kind of, there's a step process that takes you through it. And obviously that's the thing. It's kind of, you know, I was put on antidepressants when I was 13. And was on them all through my teenage years, all through my 20s, all off and on and off and on and off and on. And none of it ever really worked. And then genuinely looking back, I don't think I was ever depressed. I don't think I've ever been depressed in my life. You know, I've never, my wife, she won't mind me saying this. She's publicly, you know, she suffers from clinical depression. And So what she describes is never what I felt, you know, the physicality of it, but the mental kind of the wall, you know, that she describes it as something that pulls her down and keeps her down, kind of thing. I've never experienced that at all, and it's even through my traumatic experiences, which are kind of not the same as yours, but similar in terms of working at local authority and, you know, having to leave work in a very short space of time. And it was really awful. That even then, I didn't feel sad. You know, I didn't. I felt a lot of things, but that was one thing that I never really felt. I never felt that something was holding me down, kind of thing. And it was kind of, I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but
absolutely does. And you're absolutely right about, you know, the weekly cycle that we go through where, you know, we start on Monday and then, you know, our battery will, if you think of it like a really, really old rechargeable battery. So you know, you may be at 100% on Monday and then it'll drop down to 50. And then when you stick it on charge, it only partially recharges.
it
And
goes up
then,
to 99 or whatever. And
yeah, you know, or, you know, even like 180, 60, 40, 20, you know, like just, you know, a gradual, you know, a progressive decline over the week. And then you don't want to do anything over the weekend to try to recuperate that energy or those spoons or whatever analogy you want to use. And then you know, lather, rinse, repeat, you go through the same cycle again. And the thing is with trauma, the annoying thing about trauma is you never know when it's going to strike.
No.
You never know when it's going to just come and hit you over the head like a shovel, you know. And I think that was certainly the thing with me, because when I started off working in the children and families team at the tender age of 23, I had an alcoholic father shouting down the phone at me, threatening to get me deported because I canceled contact with his infant daughter because he had turned up to the last contact session absolutely 3 sheets to the wind. And I just let that roll off my back. You know, I thought, A, you can't deport me because I'm a British citizen, and B, you're just an angry alcoholic who doesn't like being told no.
No.
And so that kind of situation, I was much more resilient to deal with, even though, you know, I was a dewy-eyed newbie and a bit like, holy crap, what have I gotten myself into in that new job? But now, you know, or, you know, January 2017, when all of this kicked off for me, you know, I was 32, newly diagnosed, you know, still relatively newly diagnosed as autistic, and dealing in a very challenging work situation. And that was literally just the straw that broke the camel's back. 23-year-old me probably could have dealt with that and just been like, oh, this guy's an ass. You know, his anger is misdirected and whatever, you know, report it to Facebook, get it taken down, life goes on. But, and even though we did those steps, you know, we reported it to Facebook, our, you know, local authority media team got involved in everything and sorted it out. But it didn't explain why I couldn't stop crying. And I think looking back on it, you know, and reflecting, the reason I couldn't stop crying is because I was so tired and I was angry, but I wasn't sad. Those tears were not of sadness. That was, I think somebody had commented on a meme that I posted the other day that tears are not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of someone being too strong for too long. Something to that effect. And I feel like that definitely reflected the experience that I had had. I had been, you know, treading water in the deep end for months on end, and just finally reached a point where it was like, I can't do it anymore. I needed rest. And, you know, what ended up turning into 6 months being off work was the most difficult time of my life. And, you know, I've been in enough workplaces and, with varying people who, when you hear of someone going off long-term sick, people think, oh, they just can't cope with it. They minimize the reasons why that person's gone off sick and
Yeah.
think that, they're just escaping from life or whatever. I
Hmm.
can categorically say that that was no vacation for me. There were some days that I couldn't even get myself out of bed, or if I could get out of bed and make it downstairs to the sofa, I wouldn't be able to leave the house.
Yeah.
I would have to force myself out to even go grocery shopping or to see my dad and my stepmom, like it sucked. It absolutely categorically sucked. And, even now, like I said, I'm a year and a half, a bit more over a year and a half beyond that incident, but I am still bearing the scars of it. I
Yeah.
still feel very fragile some days. And yeah, I would say on the whole, it's slowly getting better, but I don't ever, and I don't want to sound pessimistic or nihilistic or anything, but I think once an autistic person hits that point of burnout, it's very difficult to get back to, life as normal,
Yeah.
whatever normal is,
Hmm.
um, afterwards. That is, a post burnout life is your new normal, and you have
Yeah.
to do your damn best to pick yourself up every day, knowing that it's going to be a struggle. And even though our communication skills may not always be top notch, we have to do our best to be able to communicate those needs to others. And I'm finding that I'm still trying to identify it in myself and recognizing the signs to be able to, reach out for help. I am awful at reaching out for help. If I'm struggling with anything, because I see everyone else on my team is really busy, like I don't want to be a burden on anyone. I don't want to put anyone out. I don't want to distract anyone from their work. So I will just carry on and struggle silently until someone comes over and asks me, how you doing? And then I break down into crying again. I don't
That's
want this to
that's
be
that's
like,
that's masking though, isn't it? That's
yeah,
completely and utterly that's part of the mask. That's something I completely recognize in myself as well. It's kind of um it's not necessarily, from my point of view, it's not necessarily not asking for help. It's more about not wanting to stick out, not wanting to
yeah,
admit that, not wanting to admit that you need help. It's kind of being, we're very eager to please, I think, to a lot of degrees. And I think part of that is fitting in, like we'll go
yeah,
out of our way to make other people feel comfortable as much as we can, because, we don't want them to start noticing that we're different. And,
yeah,
and part of that feeds into the whole compliance issue of how compliant we kind of can be and kind of are. And, but I think what you've described there is completely that, isn't it? It's kind of, not wanting to show yourself up and not wanting to kind of, to be able to say, look, I can't handle this. I don't know what the hell's going on, but, this is me, deal with it, kind of thing. It would be lovely to be able to say that, but we just can't, can we? And it's
no.
so hard. So do you, maybe not to the degree that you're describing here, but do you recognize these periods of burnout from throughout your life? Having, you've got the context now, you're looking back at your life through an autistic lens. Do you
Yeah.
see this happening to you previously?
Oh, I need to go through my memory Rolodex for a moment and see if I can think of anything. I mean, I certainly can think of incidents of bridge burning, like, I mean, apologies in advance. This is kind of going slightly on a tangent, but at the end of high school, I ended up becoming someone that I just don't even recognize because, and again, looking back on my life through that autistic lens, what I see now is, 17-year-old Kate couldn't cope with the fact that high school was ending. Her and her friends were going to be dispersing off and going to different colleges and universities.
Mm.
And the routine that she had gotten to know for the better part of, 13 years, counting back to kindergarten, that is,
Yeah.
Was going to be completely changing. And how I coped with that was completely cutting my friendship group off.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was a very small friendship group. And even though, I, for all intents and purposes, I say they were my friends, and they were, but even when we were in a group, I still felt like I was on the periphery and was still trying very hard to match them and to fit in, and what it ended up being was I ended up rejecting them before they could reject me, which is insane. It's absolutely insane. And sorry, that's ableist language, but I'm using that colloquially, not
I see your point. That's
literally.
Uh-huh.
It's just mad for me to look back and think, what were you doing? You had Oh, did we cut out for a second there?
Yeah, just for a second. Uh-huh.
Okay. We have no reason, you have no reason, talking to past me. You had no reason to do that. Like, just because high school was ending did not mean that those friendships had to end. They would be different, but I just couldn't cope with that transition. And the only way for me to cope with that was to become completely insular
and disengage from it completely.
Yeah. I didn't go to a single graduation party. I didn't have a graduation party for myself. A couple of my friends turned up at my house to see if I was okay, and I had my mother go to the door and tell them she's fine. Just go home, basically. And I try not to have too many regrets in life, but I regret how I handled that, but only insofar as I didn't know any better.
No, you handled it as best you could at the time with the knowledge that you had to hand and the emotions that you were dealing with at the time as well. And it's, again, context is a brilliant word because you had no context for what you were feeling, did you? So
no, none whatsoever.
And I don't even think there's a conscious thing where you think, oh, everybody else is feeling like this, because it's at times, I remember reflecting back on my own kind of growing up and similar things to what you described there. I didn't even think about what other people might be, what other people might be doing or how other people might be feeling. At that point, I couldn't get myself out of myself.
Yeah.
And it's because you disengage and it's kind of like a shutdown to a degree, isn't it? You withdraw into yourself, and it's kind of your field of vision becomes much, much narrower, even physically becomes much narrower at times like that, doesn't it? And I don't know if that's an extreme anxiety thing or it's...
I think to a degree it is. And if anything, it's kind of going into a self-preservation mode, like trying to prevent a burnout almost, because you can sense the shift.
Something's happening.
Something's happening and I don't like it. So, before the earthquake hits, you go down into your shelter.
I was just thinking exactly the same thing.
You go down into that bunker and you're like, I'll only poke my head up when I think it's safe. And if anything, I'm just sad that those friendships ended up breaking down because I was the catalyst for it. And that hurts me a lot because, again, with hindsight, my friends didn't deserve that. So if any of them are watching, I'm sorry for what it's
Get in
worth.
contact. Send Kate a message. What you've been talking about there, I find it really interesting because you and I have so many parallels of experiences in our lives and the way that we think and feel and the way that we act and the mannerisms that we have, the stims that we do, all sorts of different things that we really have in common.
Yeah.
Now, that brings me really, really succinctly to gendering autism.
Right.
Now, at the minute, we have, you have boys on one side who act in their very boyish way and are full of testosterone and are barging around the playground, knocking people over left, right, and centre. This is autistic boys. And then you have girls that read books and sit quietly in a corner. They're the, that's boys and that's girls. But it's not like that at all, is it? Because how you describe growing up autistic, you could be talking about me. So therefore, I don't fit into the boy department. And I know girls who are diagnosed who very much fit into the boy department but don't fit into the girl department. So where I'm leading to with this is obviously the narrative at the minute that is being pushed is that the reason that girls are very much lacking in diagnosis or missed is because they mask.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yes, obviously do mask. Lots of girls mask amazingly, but equally lots of boys mask amazingly as well. So it must be a much more complicated issue than just girls are masking, that's why they're missed. So what do you think it is? Why are they being missed really?
Well, I think because, at least speaking from my own experience,
Mm-hmm.
that's the only one I can, speak to with any
Mm-hmm.
sort of credibility. Believe it or not, gender socialization was one of my areas of interest when I was a graduate student.
Okay.
And I recently recorded a podcast with Becca Laurie of Spectrumly Speaking, where I talked about gender socialization and autism. And I think what it boils down to is that, in the stereotypical presentations of male and female autism, boys are given much more free rein into how they present behaviorally, and adults tend to be more permissive when they act out. The tolerance level is much higher for boys to play up,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, than it is for girls. And the behavioral expectations for girls are very rigid. If you're too far one way, you're a sassy little madam, and you're too far the other way, and you're a shy recluse who people just tend to ignore, and anything within those bounds is acceptable. Anything outside of that, no.
Mm-hmm.
And, certainly for me, I said this, earlier, if I misbehaved and I was, told off or given a smack on the back of the hand because, sorry, folks, that's the time I grew up in, a smack on the hand was permissible. I hated that feeling of guilt for having misbehaved or
Mm-hmm.
to have warranted that sort of reaction. Or, heck, some of the times it wasn't even my fault. It was my brother's fault. That's by the by. And you end up, because you're not really conscious of the behaviors that you're doing before you learn to speak. They say that your memory starts around the time that you become fluent in speech, because you have language to put as a context to your memories. So you think of, birth to 3 or 4, any behaviors that you are doing and then are kind of, either suppressed or knocked out of you, or however, you want to put it, you're not even conscious that you were doing them beforehand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so as you grow up, as you said before, we are very keen to please. I'm very much a people pleaser and will go out of my way to make sure everyone else is happy before I even think about myself. And you end up adapting that behavior so much that you end up trying to fit in socially more. and you end up mirroring your peers a lot
Yeah.
more. And when you see the negative behaviors and how adults react to it, and you think, oh, okay, I know now not to do that because that's undesirable.
Yes.
And, you try to stick more with, the more acceptable behaviors. That's certainly what happened with me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't act out, I did well,
Yeah.
and I flew under everyone's radar.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think, socially, the fact that, we're in 2018 and we're still having conversations about, equal pay for women and,
Yeah.
um, the Me Too movement in terms of, sexual abuse and harassment of women. Women are still very much second class citizens.
Yeah.
And that is drilled into us from a very early age.
Mm-hmm.
So we are taught to be, you know, good little girls for the most part.
Yeah.
And that is where the mask starts adhering to our face
Mm-hmm.
very early on, whether our parents knew it or not. And that's not a dig at parents, but
No.
it's just kind of, that's the way the cookie crumbles.
See, I wonder with me, um, I mean, this is completely like random, but I grew up, my mum, two sisters. My dad wasn't around much. My mum, looking at her, she's got frontal lobe disease now, and her autistic traits have become more and more apparent as she's gotten older, and as that's kicked in, they've become really extreme, and she's undiagnosed. But my oldest sister was diagnosed at the same time as me, and so I wonder from my perspective if growing up in effectively a house full of autistic women that my mirroring was a reflection of them. So,
it
and that's
very well
why
could have been.
and it's it's completely obviously non-scientific and just complete speculation, but it's kind of, so I wonder how many other boys that fit the female schema, for want of a better phrase, are growing up in environments where it's predominantly autistic women that are around them, and it's kind of, or at the very least are growing up in an environment where, like you said, you fit into that good girl bracket where boys are growing up in autistic boys that grow up in female households. It would be really interesting research into that, actually.
It would
to see if
yeah.
they fit into that female schema because they're mirroring the women that they're around who also fit into that schema, whether they're autistic or not. And it's kind of fitting into that kind of societal role. And because you have really just described what you just described, really, you have really described a woman, in terms of how society views that a woman should be. And it's kind of, the good girl got good grades, and you did what you were told, you're keen to please. That's a very, you go out of your way to help people, and it's all what you're describing there is a societal view of a woman, isn't it? And it's kind of, it's just this whole thing like fascinates me like that, and it's kind of, but this is why I struggle as well, because like even in the UK in Autism Awareness Week, the program that was on Channel 4 about autism during that week was very much it was about two people that were being diagnosed, a man and a woman being diagnosed through the whole thing, but a lot of the framing about it was female perspective and female autism, which was really, really good. But the message that I came away with, having watched it with like my eagle eye, was only girls must, only girls must, and that's why we're not being diagnosed, because girls must. And it's kind of, and it is so much more complicated than that, isn't it? And so much more complex than then.
Absolutely.
But I worry, and this isn't like a what about the men thing at all, but I do worry that then that boys that kind of fit into the way that I am, that are very similar to the way that you are, that then those boys are the ones that continue to be overlooked, because everyone's now, these are the boys over here behaving as boys should be behaving, and then these are the girls now that we're going to look at and really focus on, and then there's these boys that are presenting in the female schema that aren't going to be looked at all. And that, I talk a bit about replacing myths with myths, and that's kind of very much falls into this, and it really worries me that's the way that we're going to go now. It veers from one extreme to the other.
I think what people need to bear in mind is the role that personality plays into it all. Mm-hmm. Because, and I really hope my husband doesn't mind me saying this. Unfortunately, he's not home for me to abased about speaking about him.
Just whisper it and no one will hear.
I try not to talk about him too much because I don't know how comfortable he is with me saying anything publicly. But what I will say is he accepts that he is neurodiverse. Okay, I will put that there. And the thing is, you know, he's not a lad's lad. You know, it's not to say that he's not masculine, but he's not your stereotypical rambunctious, rowdy, goes in on a piss up with the lads, you know, the holidays to Ibiza when you're 18 type of shenanigans. He's not that stereotypical archetypal male. And, you know, he too was very intelligent, did well in school. If anything, I would say that he wasn't challenged enough in school. You know, he could have done fantastically amazing things if, you know, the education system of the late 80s, early 90s hadn't effectively failed him in that respect.
Yeah.
So he was a bit bored in school. He did well, you know, well enough. Probably didn't reach his maximum potential, but, you know, he too flew low on the radar. But, you know, my mother-in-law has told me stories about him where when he was in primary school, he needed to be given a reason to go to school every day. And sometimes that, because he just couldn't see the logic in it, you know, he just didn't want to go. So even if, you know, his mom just wrote him a little Post-it note and said, you need to give this to your teacher, that would be his reason to go to school for the day, you know? And so in that respect, you know, he wouldn't have, if his parents knew then what, like you and I know now about autism, I think they might have, you know, at least considered having him assessed.
Yeah.
You know, at this point in his life, because, you know, he is a white male, and, you know, let's face it, you know, white men in our Western society are kind of peak. You know, he doesn't see any benefit in pursuing a diagnostic assessment for himself at this point. You know, whereas I felt like I needed to in order to be believed. You know, I not only wanted that validation for myself in terms of, you know, putting my life, you know, from 30 and prior into a context, but going forward with that whole, you know, saying again, you can't unring a bell type of thing.
Yeah.
I want to be able to explain to people, you know, especially employers and work colleagues, that when things seem to be teetering on the edge of going wrong, there is a reason behind it. And it's not because I'm being dramatic. It's not like, it's not because I'm on the rag. It's not because, you know, a whole plethora of reasons where women tend to be dismissed.
Yeah.
And again, that comes down to the fact that it's 2018 and women are still, you know, to a degree, second-class citizens. Women's pain is not believed. Women's emotions are not believed. And I'm very much, you know, the angry autistic woman in the corner who's like, down with the patriarchy. And, you know, I want everyone to understand that, you know, we have a voice, we have valuable experience, and we have the right to be heard and listened to.
Yeah.
And yeah. Sorry if I went on a bit of a tangent there.
No, you didn't at all, actually, because I noticed someone had made a comment about victim blaming, which we mentioned just briefly before, and about how I think it's easier for professionals to look for reasons why women in particular haven't been diagnosed, rather than looking at the diagnostic criteria that they're using. It's easier to blame them, to say, you know, like girls must. That's obviously where that narrative is coming from. That's why they're not being diagnosed. They're masking, they're hiding it, it's their fault. Whereas actually, if you looked at the diagnostic criteria, which obviously we briefly mentioned earlier, about it is very much geared towards boys. Historically, it is very, very narrow, absolutely narrow. A lot of it is, I would argue, factually incorrect. Covering a broader base of autistic people, very outdated, very old-fashioned, very clinical in its thinking, like you said. And that's not just the DSM-5; that's the ICD-10, which is turned into ICD-11. It's the fact that ICD-11 is taking out sensory stuff potentially, which is obviously a huge part of being autistic. And so it's kind of, it is victim blaming, isn't it? And what you've just said there kind of reinforces that, and especially when it comes to looking at girls and women who are being missed. What you said there about how the patriarchal views and being second-class citizens and blaming certain aspects of being a woman for how women are, how you might be behaving or how you might be acting, or it's so derogatory, isn't it? It really is.
The term hysterical derives from saying that a woman's madness originates from her womb. That's why there's the term hysterectomy. Hysteria, I love linguistics too. I'm a bit hyperlexic.
But it's still like, even though we are now in 2018, and I say that as so many people say that, it's 2018, things should be different, which really doesn't mean anything. But we're still effectively living in a Victorian society, aren't we? And it's
Victorian society with smartphones.
Yeah, basically, that's what we are. We haven't, in a lot of ways, we haven't moved on at all, have we? It's, certain aspects of society have moved on, but we still have the Victorian patriarchs sitting there controlling and running things, don't they? And then, and that's the narrative that we have to run with and live with. It's
absolutely the fact that, and it absolutely breaks my heart. And we're not going to make this about American politics.
No.
But just this little nuance. The fact that, the current administration in the States is trying to, not only remove a woman's choice to have an abortion, to remove the options for safe abortion, but are also considering forced sterilization of disabled women. It's a bunch of old white men who are on Capitol Hill making decisions that they have absolutely zero business making. And these are the people that, we have elected effectively to represent us, or not elected by the virtue of not voting, by people not engaging in the electoral process. We end up getting these people who are supported by, dastardly agendas that are trying to dial the time back on society generations. And it's like, we have come so far in so many ways, but I feel like more recently we are still taking steps backwards. And that's where I get my nihilistic existential crisis on a daily basis. What is the point of even trying? So
but when you frame that in a context of autism, which is effectively the same, not just boys and girls and men and women and everyone in between, but just autism in itself, it is a bunch of old white guys making decisions about us without including us, isn't it? And that's kind of, and even when you look at research that's being, when researchers put out calls for research, statistically, the people who are most likely to engage in research are people who are just diagnosed. So people who haven't had a chance to figure themselves out, but yet they're still feeding, they're answering these questions, and they're still coming from a very clinical, pathological point of view of autism. And so they're feeding the research, which then feeds all the different treatments and things like that that are investigating. It's a feedback loop, isn't it? It is a complete cycle, and it's, and that's not to disparage anyone who's just been diagnosed or anything like that. But, I know from myself, when I was diagnosed at 23, I didn't have a clue what to do with it. There was no support for me at all at that time. There is very little support now. So I parked my diagnosis for 10 years. I didn't have a clue what to do with it, so I just put it to one side and just carried on burning myself out over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Brain, and it's repeating the same cycles, and it's kind of, it takes you to be aware of yourself and introspective, and then to be outrospective, to start talking to other autistic people and engaging with other autistic people before you get a real sense of what autism actually is and how it applies to different people and different, I hate the spectrum. I hate the phrase the spectrum and the linear spectrum itself.
Oh yeah.
But because everybody's individual and have their own personalities, like you said before, everybody presents very, very differently because people have different co-occurring conditions that go along with autism, or not necessarily co-occurring conditions. They might have other things going on that aren't necessarily autism related, but it affects how they present. And it's kind of, so how they can come up with a diagnostic criteria which has like 10 points and 10 different areas, and you must meet a tick in 3 out of 5 of them, and it's kind of, it's crackers. It's absolutely. But all of this feeds into masking, doesn't it? And that was a very long-winded way of me getting back to masking. I know we should probably, we're doing a feature film at the minute. We're nearly up to 2 hours. But
hey,
all
for
of this
anyone who is still watching now, kudos to you and thank you very much.
You will get an Oscar, not us. But all of this feeds into the mask, doesn't it? All of this is this negativity and this absolute lack of positivity and this very narrowed thinking feeds into why we mask. It feeds into what society thinks of us.
Yeah, and I've managed to put this down into some lovely bullet points for any viewers who are still with us at this point. So with masking in children, and just as a little caveat, I tend to use the terms masking and camouflaging as 2 separate things.
Okay.
So the masking is a very individual thing where you're hiding, you're suppressing your behaviors, and you're trying to be someone else, in the actual, metaphor of wearing an actual mask like you do at Halloween. But with camouflaging, that is more the social side of things. You are mirroring others, and therefore you are trying to blend in.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to stand out. And, certainly for me, I hate being the center of attention. I don't like all eyes being on me. My husband and I very nearly eloped because planning the wedding was way too much for my poor little brain to cope with. And as soon as the guest list started growing, I actually went so far as to booking a B&B in Gretna Green. Hand on heart, I did that. But then I ended up canceling it because I thought my dad would be really disappointed if I just came back one day. Hi. So, but we ended up having a very small wedding with only 21 guests because that was the level I could cope with. Anything more than that, full-blown meltdown. I just could not cope with it. So that's where I draw the difference between masking and camouflaging. You can be masking whilst you're camouflaging, but I still think they're 2 separate things. So the impact on diagnosis or misdiagnosis, or all out missed, MISSED diagnosis in children, is that they may not demonstrate the typical autistic traits, as you and I were saying about the DSM and the ICD-10. And it's not necessarily evident if it's innate or learned behaviors. It's very difficult. During my own assessment, I couldn't switch off because I thought, well, is this natural to me, or is it natural because I've learned it? Like, again, it's a chicken egg situation. Which came first? So that was very difficult to kind of prize apart during my assessment. And certainly for children who tend to fly under the radar, that would be very difficult to parse out as well, especially if they are very compliant, they have learned these behaviors, and they're very keen to please.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, it's the children who may present with the more challenging behaviors that may receive the diagnosis sooner because their parents are pulling their hair out and don't know what else to do.
Sure.
But in my opinion, the longer it takes to get a professional diagnosis or professional validation, however you wish to put it, the more difficult school will get, the higher the risk of negative behaviors manifesting, and the higher risk of poor health. And when I say that, I'm talking about mental, physical, and emotional. And the negative behaviors manifesting may be self-harm oriented or self-injurious, where and those are two different things as well. Self-harm is, sorry, trigger warnings, talking about self-harm here. Self-harm is a very deliberate act trying to release pain, whereas self-injurious behavior is you are at such a high emotional state that you are at risk of causing harm to yourself through how emotional you are. So there was a girl that was on my caseload when I worked in South Gloucestershire who grabbed a kitchen knife and nearly stabbed herself when she was in the middle of a meltdown. She was not trying to hurt herself. She had just completely lost control. And she had made it to, I think, year 5 without diagnosis. And I mean, still year 5 is early for girls.
Yeah.
But it was because her mental health had deteriorated so much because she could not cope with the sensory environment of the classroom. And we eventually got her into a week-long boarding specialist independent school where she thrived because she was around staff and trained professionals who understood the dynamics of working with autistic children, especially those with high emotional and mental health needs. And this can then, so the masking can have an impact on school life where there's either a risk of poor academic performance despite ability, or hyper-focus and almost hell-bent on perfectionism. So my husband and I are kind of the two sides of that coin. I was a perfectionist. I was not happy if I didn't get an A or 100 on things, and I would be very quick to critique myself if I got anything wrong, even if it was just one question that I literally did not know the answer to. Whereas my husband is very academically gifted, but he wasn't challenged enough in school. So he just kind of skated by with passing grades, but he could have done so much more.
Yeah.
And there can also be poor peer relationships, if any at all. You tend to find autistic girls think that they have a best friend, but that best friend is actually a bully and just takes the mick out of them because they're an easy target. That was me.
It was me as well.
It's awful, isn't it?
It sucks. It really does. It really does. So how do you go about if you've, for example, if you've got a girl that's been missed and you're getting into kind of 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever age kind of thing, how do you go about, it's been missed for that long, how do you go about then evidence it, especially if she presents as you did or I did, like the flying under the radar kind of missed? How do you go about evidencing that? Have you got any kind of tips? Or it's a very hard question when you don't know the individual, but it's...
Yeah. If anything, parents are as close to being the expert on their children as possible. The only expert on the child is the child themselves. But unfortunately, that's a very high burden of responsibility to put on a child's shoulders because they don't have the life experience to be that self-aware.
No.
So by having the parents, caregivers, the professionals around them being aware of these key issues that we're bringing to the forefront through this campaign, hopefully they'll be able to become a bit more sensitive to recognizing the signs. So I was a chronic nail biter as a kid. you know, and as I mentioned in my video about dermatillomania, a skin picker as well. Nobody would have necessarily picked up on that at the time when I was growing up, but being a chronic nail biter or a skin picker, that is a sign of anxiety. And rather than just saying, you know, stop biting your nails, stop picking at your skin, you're going to give yourself a scar, you know, rather than demonizing that behavior, just coming down to their level and saying, are you feeling okay? Is something worrying you? And they may not necessarily be able to articulate it. And I would be amazed if they're able to articulate it at, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. But just by recognizing the signs of the anxiety or the stims that they might be doing to cope, you know, the constant juddering of a leg, for instance, or tapping or fidgeting, or, you know, pulling at their hair, whatever, you know, being more cognizant of these subtle signs and not necessarily looking for the overt meltdown to occur, you know, or, you know, being a bit more aware of the peer relationships, you know, so for school professionals in particular, noticing how the child interacts with their peers. Do they tend to just kind of, you know, sidle over and be alongside them but not really engage, or do they seem to be more at the receiving end of teasing? Or, you know, it's subtle nuances, and it's trying to get beyond the, oh, that's just bullying, oh, that's just, you know, fobbing it off as something else. That's not to say that every child in their class is autistic, but it's looking beyond the surface. It's looking below the surface and trying to understand, because, you know, and I've said this when I was in social work and in SEN, I do not believe that children are intrinsically, you know, have any intrinsic evil or badness in them.
No.
There are some who, you know, end up being serial killers in that, but let's talk about, you know, the general population. Let's talk about the majority here. Children's behavior is their way of communicating where their speech cannot. And especially those who are nonverbal or selective mutes, their behavior is their way of communicating their anxiety. I certainly, you know, even now, if I feel like I am on the verge of tears, I will become mute and have to hastily scribble down on a piece of paper, or if I have my computer, I'll type on my computer or in a text app on my phone. And that in and of itself is a communication. The, you know, losing the ability to speak is still a method of communication, paradoxically. And it's about, you know, just having these professionals who, you know, people don't go into teaching for the luxurious life that it affords you, because it's not luxurious being a teacher. And if anything, teachers and teaching assistants especially are grossly underpaid. People go into these vocations because they give a damn. They care. And it's about honing in that nurturing nature within themselves and being able to look beyond the surface at what, you know, what is that behavior trying to communicate to me, and not just seeing it as they're being disobedient, they're being naughty, you know, because that's the thing with autistic kids is, I'm sure you've seen the promos, not promos, but, you know, the awareness videos that the National Autistic Society have done. I'm not naughty, I'm autistic. It's really hitting that point home. The challenging behavior is a method of communication, and I cannot emphasize that enough.
It really is. And it's kind of, I know, I don't know if you know Shona Davison. She's done some really good work in how challenging behavior in autistic children, and not just autistic children, is often a reflection of challenging behavior from the adults that are around them as well. What the child perceives as challenging behavior towards them. And it's kind of, it's like, I always say communication's a two-way street, and it's kind of where we're seen as having a disability, where we're seen as lacking in communication. It's, the person who's trying to communicate with us is also lacking as well, because they're not communicating in an effective way that meets our needs as well. And it's kind of, I think that's something that's often missing, isn't it, from professionals looking and identifying children. They see things from their perspective, but don't see it from the child's perspective. And it's kind of, this is the thing that irritates me. We're accused of being very binary. We're accused of being rigid. We're accused of not being able to see things from other people's points of view. And but we can chuck that back out at everybody else in society as well. It's
a tough pill for them to swallow.
It is, isn't it? And and they don't like it either. But it's kind of tough shit, because it's true, and it's
Absolutely.
But then, and again, coming kind of full circle, it's their decisions that impact on us, and their decisions are taken from an absolute point of bias in their favor. They're making decisions that are impacting on our lives and our children's lives and our families' lives, and it's a real desperate situation, isn't it? And pressure on teachers is enormous at the minute as well. And it's kind of, it's just it's a mess, isn't it?
It's a perfect storm. It's an absolute perfect storm. And this is why you end up seeing, there's so many parents, and I know you and I are both in the FIGS group, the Fighting Injustice for Girls on the Spectrum.
Yeah.
They end up masking so much, and they tend to bottle up any tension that they have during the school day, and then exploding once they get home, like a shaken bottle of pop, and this is where, in the assessment requests that come through, parents are saying, my child is unrecognizable when they're at home versus what they are in school. And this is why it's so important, considering how many hours in a week teachers and teaching assistants are with these children. They're with these children more than their parents are during the week, especially when they reach school age, that they really, obviously, if they have a classroom of 30 children, it's very difficult to be able to, intensely monitor every single one and any, dynamic shifts or what have you. But if there's even a remote suspicion that a child may be autistic, they really need to turn up that radar to, pick up on the subtle frequency changes, if you will, going along with the, the earthquake analogy again. It starts as little tremors before it gets much bigger. And it's about picking up when there's those little seismic tremors. It's like, what's happening here? And, by recognizing this, it's very difficult to think of these children becoming adults. But I think that's another aspect that we really need to focus on here is the impact of missed or misdiagnosis in childhood has on adulthood. They may not achieve the grades they would need to pursue further or higher education. They may have difficulty finding or maintaining employment, and being out of work could, in a worst case scenario, lead to homelessness. And there's a disproportionate number of autistic people who are homeless. And through that, they may not be able to achieve their desired level of independence, especially commensurate with their level of cognitive ability, and they may carry poor health and habits into adulthood and may develop or exacerbate existing poor mental health. So the depression, the anxiety that we spoke of before, unresolved issues from childhood, bullying, eating disorders, self-harm, what have you, all of these things that can manifest in early childhood where the improper support is, you know, either wrong support is put in place or support is missing altogether. You know, I think, you know, I can certainly say for myself that I'm quite lucky that I've ended up where I am. You know, I am university educated, I am employed, I have a roof over my head, I have a, you know, loving family and friends around me, but I know that's not the case for everyone. And, you know, children don't ask to be born, but we have a responsibility as the adults around them who love and care about them to give them the best shot at life that they can have, because the world is a scary and complicated place.
It is.
You know, and that's for a neurotypical person.
Yeah.
You know, and because society as of yet is not built to appropriately accommodate the neurodiverse among us, we really rely on that support from the neurotypicals around us to be able to help guide us through.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the autistic elders, yourself and myself included here, you know, I just hope that our, you know, our stories are taken seriously, that our experience is taken at, you know, at what it is, you know, firsthand, and, you know, learn from the mistakes of our past, you know, and the mistakes of those who, you know, supported or didn't support us earlier in life, you know. Sorry, I feel like I've gotten all deep there.
It's good. It's good. I think the biggest takeaway from that, and probably all of this, is obviously not only being able to step back and, from a parent perspective, taking a step back and looking at their children and assessing how they are feeling and what they have been through recently and in their past and things, and how that could be impacting how they're feeling now. But it's also not to limit them either.
Yeah.
And that's very much what we're talking about here, really, isn't it? At the heart of it, it's kind of we, you and I, and many of us are often accused or told by parents, "You are not like my child," and you know, we are your child.
We're more like them than you think.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just because you see us sitting here talking on the internet does not mean that we have not been through the experiences that your child has been through, or aren't still going through the experiences that your child is going through, or equally that if not me, if not you, then the autistic advocate that works next to us or works next to them or works next to them have been through what your child has been through. And we all talk to each other. We all engage with each other. We all learn from each other. And it's so important that parents start doing this as well, isn't it? And it's to start recognizing masking, to start recognizing burnout, and then feeding that information back to professionals and banging on professionals' doors and saying, look, go and watch this video that Kate and Kieran just did. Go and watch all these other things and read all these blogs and read all these. Listen to the words that are being said, because it comes from a point of experience.
You know, bring a bowl of popcorn and a tall soda. It's going to take a while to unpick it all. But, you know, if anything, you know, part of the reason it's so strange, like looking back, you know, 3 years ago, pre-diagnosis, I would never have guessed that I would be, you know, slowly becoming a public face in the online autism community. I would never have guessed that, because, you know, again, like I said before, I don't like being the center of attention, but I started the blog because I needed a place to, you know, kind of like Dumbledore in Harry Potter, that you know, when he uses the pensieve, he pulls the thoughts out of his brain and puts them down to look at them later on. That's
make
what
sense
I was
of them.
Yeah, that was effectively what I was doing with my blog. And the reason I put it out publicly but anonymously was because my story could be anybody's, you know, and that was really when I wanted to hit home. If another woman who was in the same position that I was in recently figured out that she might be autistic and was just trawling the internet looking anywhere for someone else's story, if they came across my blog and was like, this is my story too, fantastic. It was never about personal recognition for me. And still today, it's not about that. I put my face to it so as to not hide behind a computer screen, I suppose, and to show that, you know, autism has many faces, and you cannot assume that anyone is or isn't just because they mask very well, they camouflage very well. And I'm very lucky that I have the gift of writing and articulation, that I am able to put my thoughts into writing in a way that touches people, and I'm humbled by that, and I'm amazed by that it has such a positive impact on people. But it's very much to try to, it's still that little tireless social worker in me that wants to see societal change, that wants to see the betterment of society, and better treatment of disabled people and better treatment of women in particular. I may have a slightly vested interest in that, but it's very much about, I want to see positive change happen in my lifetime. And if you're not willing to help enact that change, then who's going to start it? Where is it going to start? And if anything, as much as Facebook infuriates me on a daily basis, I am glad that it has allowed me to network with people like yourself, like Hannah, like Sarah from Agony Audie, from Krista from Neurodivergent Rebel, who I met through the International Aspergirl Society, believe it or not. I've met Barb Cook that way from Spectrum Women. I met Artemisia, the artist formerly known as Rudy Simone. And, I have managed to build this amazing network of autistic friends and peers that I would have never have met if I hadn't attended the autism show for that day of continuing professional development in June 2015. It's absolutely crazy.
It is, isn't it? But it's like we have a family now, isn't it? It very, very much feels like that, and it very much feels like that to me. Particularly not just amongst the autistic community, but amongst the advocacy community as well.
Yeah.
When a lot of like-minded people come together, only good things can really happen from that, can't they? And we will change the world. If not for us, then for our children or our grandchildren. And I've always said, everything that I write comes from here, comes from the heart, comes from my experience. And if I go down as the smallest footnote on the smallest footnote on the smallest footnote of a history of neurodiversity, then I'll be happy with that. I don't care, because it's not about me. It's about what we can do to change the world for everybody, and that's kind of where we are. If we don't burn out first, just to pull it back to point.
Absolutely. And if I can kind of use that little segue to plug the Spectrum Women book, which is
plug away,
coming out. It's going to be out on the 21st. It's very, very soon. It's only a few days away. Despite the tragic tale of my burnout that I told earlier, people were a lot younger when they heard that story. I managed to help pull myself out through participating in a once in a lifetime opportunity of writing or co-authoring with 15 other amazing autistic women, the Spectrum Women book, Walking to the Beat of Autism, edited and compiled by Barb Cook, who I previously mentioned from Spectrum Women, and Dr. Michelle Garnett, who gives her professional insight at the end of every chapter that we all contributed to. And this truly was an international achievement. Women in the US, Canada, the UK, Germany, and Australia all contributed to this book. And we are so proud of it. And if anything, how it's unique is that all 15 of us have had very different life experiences. But where you said before, like, there's a lot of parallels between you and I, there were a lot of parallels throughout our lives as well. Despite growing up in different countries at different times, you know, we cover the age range as well. And we talk about from early childhood into, you know, menopause and later life. And it's a very, you know, I may sound a bit biased because I'm plugging my own book here, but it is going to be a very important book for helping illustrate what the female autistic experience is. And I hope that it educates and enlightens, you know, as many people as possible. Really.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to reading it. It's I'm hoping to get a signed copy direct from Barb. So
lovely. Oh, did you order it from her website?
She doesn't know this yet, but she's going to be sending me a signed copy of it. So.
Nice.
And then I'll pop it in the post down to you, and you can sign your parts as well.
Well, I was going to say, if you and I get to meet in person one day, I would happily sign it. So yeah, should we wrap it up there then?
Yeah, I think so. I think
2.25 hours.
I'm gonna get a burnt baked potato thrown at me, I think, so when I get back downstairs.
Oh dear. If anything, you know, I feel like this has been a really wonderful chat. I could talk to you for hours, Kieran. And
I could talk to you for hours as well.
I do hope that the people who have stuck through to this point in the live stream have found it as informative and engaging as it was for me to make it, at least.
I think we definitely need to do this again, don't we?
Yeah.
We'll pick a topic and stick to it next time. But it doesn't matter because everything is so interwoven, isn't it? And all tied together, and it's really hard to just stick with something and not tangent off and cover other bits as well, isn't it?
But we kept coming back to the point. We kept segueing. But this is how my chats with my other autistic friends go. You know, we go off on tangent, and I call it, you know, it's like when you're on Wikipedia and you start on one page and then you click on other links within. Like there was one day I was looking up. This is going to sound really bizarre. I was looking up the statutory age for consent in America. And I somehow ended up at the Christ the Redeemer statue in Brazil. Have no idea how I got there. But that's what I call wiki spidering. Yeah. You know, you end up, you know, jumping from one topic to another, but at least you and I managed to bring it back to the point in the whole.
That's a really good metaphor for how the autistic brain works as well, though, isn't it? So...
Absolutely. I've got, if my brain was a, you know, Internet Explorer, Chrome, or whatever browser you choose to use, I've got 31 tabs open, 16 have frozen, and I have no idea where that music is coming from. Yep. So, welcome to my brain, folks. It's a wild ride. So
it's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Kate.
Thank
you. Just before we go, I just want to say, if anybody's got any questions, or if anybody's asked any questions that we haven't seen, because there've been so many comments flashing up, and obviously we've been too engaged in talking to each other rather than paying attention to what the audience wants. I'll go back through the thread, and hopefully Kate will be able to over the next couple of. Don't expect anything now of us, because we're both going to go and clap. So I know that for a fact. So over the next couple of days, we'll go through the thread and answer any questions. And anybody who's watching this, obviously after the event, feel free to ask anything, and we'll try to answer as best we can. But this won't be the end. I'm sure we can think of a few other topics to talk about, can't we? And
I think we've got fodder for a podcast of our own.
I think we have as well. I have. We'll add that to the list of things to do.
Indeed. One thing at a time. Let's finish this campaign first, and then we'll go forward from there.
And then I'll take 6 years off, and then we'll talk about it.
Indeed.
Okay, right. I'm going to end the broadcast now, folks. So thank you very much for watching. This has been Kate Ross. Kate, before we go, your website. What's your website?
So my website, you can find my blog at IamMyOwnExperience.com. I know that is a bit of a mouthful. My page on Facebook is Cherry Blossom Tree, My Autism Experience, which is at facebook.com/IamMyOwnExperience. And you can also find me on Twitter and on Instagram. So I look forward to meeting and engaging with you all there.
Excellent. Right. Thank you very much, Kate, as ever. You are on the Autistic Advocates page, and you can find my blog at the same address on the internet. Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I'm going to go and have a very cold and hard dinner now. So.
Thank you very much, Kieran.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.